Red Skull is a supervillain that all other supervillains were based on afterwards. He is one of the first, one of the most famous, and one of the most classic supervillains.
Red Skull is visually one of the coolest characters of all time.
Within the comics, he was one of Hitler's right-hand men and became one of the quintessential Marvel bad guys. He's been around for quite a while. I mean, his visual is wonderful, horrifically wonderful, but still wonderful nevertheless.
He's a unique villain in Marvel in the fact that there's not a lot of empathy for him.
He is bad through and through. We have one guy that you can look at and go, this is the guy who has got no redeeming characteristics. It's the Red Skull. He is bent on world domination.
We wanted Red Skull to be scary as hell, and we wanted people to take him seriously. And there were two things that we knew would be required. Incredible design for the Red Skull itself that looked scary but not grotesque, that looked frightening and sort of graphically iconic, and we needed an actor who could pull it off in a way that was not campy, and was not cheesy, and was downright frightening. And the first name that came up was Hugo Weaving.
Red Skull is a very iconic character. It's very big shoes to fill. An actor that can be so many things, someone that can still give a performance with this prosthetic on his face.
Unfortunately, I am on a tight schedule.
Hugo has been so great. His performance absolutely does shine through.
Cut.
The character I play is called Johann SCHMIDT. He's interested in Norse mythology. He's interested in a power beyond an earthly power, controlling this spiritual power. And I always thought that was probably the most interesting thing about him as a character.
I think the important thing is to treat him as Johann SCHMIDT for as long as you possibly can, and not treat him as the Red Skull, a man with a big red skull. While he does have the big red skull, even once that's revealed, it works a lot better if you've known him as a man.
It is a moment of terrible possibility.
The SCHMIDT you see at the beginning of the film looks a little bit like me, but SCHMIDT's my face is actually the mask that he wears to, I suppose, to get on in the world without people being horrified by the way he looks. But Red Skull is the character he's become as a result of the serum. So he has superhuman powers, and he's an incredibly intelligent man. He's a scientist. He's like all good villains, interested in dominating everyone else and controlling controlling the world.
Villains are always the heroes of their own story. I think the best actors know this. Hugo certainly does.
The minute Hugo was cast, we knew we were on our way to having a great, real, scary villain. And then the design came, and Charlie Wan and Ryan Meinerding worked on the design of the Red Skull.
Looking back at a lot of the comics and seeing, you know, the huge protuberances and stuff from the cheekbones and the brow, I always really liked that stuff. I wanted to try and make it unabashed Red Skull, to try and bring an oddness to it that hopefully makes it feel like Red Skull and makes him feel as scary as he possibly could be.
I embrace it proudly, without fear.
We did a few versions, and it's pretty easy to go creepy with it. He could look burned, he could look scarred.
We did go down a path of what felt more anatomically correct, or what would be like a, you know, realistic transformation of if some guy had his face burnt off like that, or if that chemical reaction happened. Ultimately, that didn't seem to matter as much as just having an iconic Red Skull that people know it's him right away.
We definitely tried some different things, and you know, just ended up with the classic Red Skull sort of looking like it's sort of scarred, but still feeling more like a skull than any type of real flesh.
The makeup was a process, and David White, who is one of the best makeup artists I've ever come to know, did a spectacular job.
Once we had Hugo weaving, it was a question of getting his face and starting the sculpt and finding out what we can get out of it, but keep it Hugo, but give it something a little extra.
If it's going to be my face that's the mask, obviously the Red Skull face needs to somehow seem to be able to fit underneath my face. So David's natural instinct was to not be too extreme with the Red Skull mask.
I kind of work very closely with actors generally. I kind of keep the prosthetic as tight to their skin as possible, so it kind of retains all their character. I did a test. The initial test was really successful. It was like, yeah, that's really good. Let's go with it.
It looks fantastic, but the hard thing about it is because it takes 3.5 hours to 4 hours to put on, I didn't have a lot of time to play with it, and it's kind of palaver to get into it. It was a matter of just saying to Joe on the first day, well, look, anything's not working, you know. So we just had to sort of say, well, that doesn't, and slowly get used to just relaxing within it. I thought I would have to actually work the mask more than I do.
There was a battle with materials on this one because we wanted to make it practical, but it had to kind of be slightly off-worldly in a way. So we used silicone. It's an unusual material for this kind of makeup because you can't kind of figure out what it is. Generally, people used to use a lot of foam latex, but it's definitely not foam. And it's just something else, and it works really well for Red Skull because it has this luminosity to it. You put him near a light, and it kind of has this glow, a slight glow to it, like some sort of lava lamp, which is kind of nice and really unusual. The prosthetic is in 7 pieces. Everything's broken up into different sections, which is why it takes 3.5 hours to stick on.
First, there's a bald cap has to go on just to smooth down my head. The next thing up with the bald cap is to glue the face and powder it, and that seems to work well with the sweat. I still sweat, but it doesn't pour out as much.
They're designed in a way, they all interlock. So the back piece goes on first, and then we have the top piece, which comes over the forehead, and then we have the face piece, which is the biggest piece, and it has this funny little locking area around here, which is part of the design. I designed it so it had a little kind of curve, so it kind of cups either side, so we know exactly where it should be. And that all goes on 2 separate ears, separate nose, separate chin, set of dentures.
Done all sorts of tests with teeth, with pulling my lip down, with top and bottom teeth.
The deal is that the piece is incredibly thin around here. All this area is really wafer thin, which means that you don't really have to upscale teeth and things. It's all Hugo's. But we did kind of have a bottom set. You know, we're using a bottom set. Initially, we tried things with hooks, pulling down corners of the mouth and things like that. But it got in the way of the performance. But the bottom set of dentures he uses gives them a little bit of kind of a mean sort of bite.
Around here is absolutely fantastic. It's quite chiseled in here. The cheekbones are quite extreme and the brows quite extreme. But the eyes and the mouth and what's there gives me a lot of expression and subtlety and expression, which is great.
To suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing end them, or whatever.
It's got to have the gumption, it's got to have the guts of a comic book feel, but not to the point that it's ridiculous. It's a very delicate balance. And also, Joe was very particular that it wasn't too visceral and too kind of real in a gruesome way. So it has to have this kind of larger-than-life kind of image. It's literally like a Chevy. It's a very organic but beautiful kind of shapes you get in different lights.
David did a spectacular job, so good. The combination of that makeup and Hugo's performance meant we enhanced it much less than we were planning. Most of that is Hugo and is the makeup, because that performance and even the way Hugo can make his eyebrow arch slightly is incredible.
You go with the live action first to try and get that in camera, and then you help that out in every shot that you need to make it look as close to the character that we had in the comics as possible. After we got some of the performance, we realized that the shape needed to be a little more gaunted. Hugo, when he turns his head, he gets a little bit of the leftover of the skin from the side, from the prosthetic itself, because clearly he's got his own neck and then the prosthetic on top of it.
The thing that we need to do with Red Skull that you can't do physically, even though you've got this great prosthetic to start with, is that there's a physicality to Hugo's face. There's, he's got a big bone structure. He's got a nose. Well, Red Skull doesn't have a nose, so we have to immediately remove his nose and create a sort of what we're calling a negative nose space, which is our cavity, which is our sort of structure within the nose and seeing into the sort of the inside. So it's really just trying to gaunt him up and make him look a little bit more stylized than is possible with a physical prosthetic. Trying to sort of square up the chin and make it just look a little bit more rigid. It's all those kind of things that we're trying to do to enhance what's already there within the practical photography, but always maintaining the Hugo-ness and making sure that you never lose that, because otherwise there's not much point in having such a great actor as Hugo Weaving play your arch villain and not being able to use that.
This is the sort of the Hugo Weaving version as he was on set, and this is what we've finally got as the Red Skull that will be appearing on screen. And as you can see, obviously he has no nose, which is the key feature, and he has this, what we call this negative nose space. So that's actually a computer-generated model of his nose, or the cavity placed over where the nose would be. We've also thinned down the lower lip area, and if you sort of look in here, if we go through, You can see that now we've thinned out this part of the lip so it's not nearly as fleshy. We've squared up the jaw. Hugo's got this gap between his teeth, so we've taken out the gap between his teeth. We've added a little bit more gaunting in the cheeks around here. We've darkened down the sockets in the eyes a little bit. Generally just tried to tighten him up. Wherever we see a crease in the prosthetic, we've removed that as well.
You are failing!
One of the most rewarding things about working with Hugo is just watching him put himself in the role so fully.
You love him as much as you hate him, and Hugo then takes that way farther than you could ever write.
When it comes to something like Red Skull, I want it to look as good, if not better, in the final film than it looked on that piece of concept art that made us excited to say this is the direction to go in, and with Red Skull that's been achieved.
Hail Hydra.
Hey there, here's today's Daily Fact. Now, in a post-credits scene in The Avengers, Chris Evans is the only character seen not eating. Now, this is apparently because the actor was wearing a prosthetic jaw for the scene as a means of covering the beard he'd been growing for Snowpiercer. Now, click here below to subscribe or on the side for more great content.